Thanks for staying with News at Prime on this Monday evening. Heavily indebted South Africans have been thrown a lifeline. President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed the National Credit Amendment Bill into law. This will allow those earning less than 7,500 rand to have their debt suspended in part or in full for up to 24 months. So let's explore what exactly the implications of this bill will be. We're joined in studio by DR.EVELYN MASOTJA. She's the Deputy Director General in the Department of Trade and Industry. Thank you so much for your time and for coming in tonight. Now, we've seen multiple responses to this bill. Perhaps before we get to part of the criticism that has been leveled against it from various sectors, there are, of course, those who have welcomed the bill, such as your trade unions, etc. And in fact, they're calling for it to be as expedited as quickly as possible. Speak to us about what you think some of the relief will be here, especially for low-income earners.
Good evening, viewers, and good evening, Kathy. There are benefits that are going to be brought forward for low-income earners, your police officers, domestic workers, and others. South Africa has a challenge of over-indebtedness of consumers. And many people, we all know somebody who's trapped in some debt of some kind. So this measure is so important because for the first time, we are having something, a measure that addresses low-income earners. There are measures in place currently that addresses insolvency, personal insolvency, like administration, sequestration. However, at this lower target band, there are no remedial solutions for them. So because of that, Parliament saw a need to actually come up with a bill to address the fact that we have over-indebted consumers who are earning low income. When they approach other parts of the industry for support, for debt review, they don't get that because it's quite costly for them, whether it's for the courts, whether it's a debt review process. So the relief is that now when I'm over-indebted, I have an opportunity to restructure my debt. And if I'm unemployed or I'm retrenched and I don't have an opportunity to do so, I'll be given an opportunity to do that. So an opportunity will be that the debt can be suspended for the first 12 months, and then it will be reviewed. So if after that time there's still a problem, we review again, and then it can be extended again. And the nice thing about it, the good thing about it is that there is an opportunity for both the consumer and the credit provider to get relief. So let's say I was unemployed when I entered this process, no income. And then after a year, I have income. Then I can then restructure my debt and start paying my debt.
How much of this is going to include absolute debt cancellation?
It is there, and I think that's where the challenge is. Because part of the process, which is a very long process, from when the application is lodged to the different reviews that happen to the point where there's an extinguishment, that is the last stage. So you take the 24 months that I've mentioned, where there's a review of suspension, review, suspension, review, suspension. So there is a possibility of that. But the focus has been with the different discussions that we are coming up with a bill that is going to extinguish debt. But that is not the intention. The intention is that already if somebody cannot pay, they are already out of the market, they can't contribute. And the positive thing I must add is that currently there are instances where debts are written off, even by the financial institutions themselves, credit providers. So with a measure like this, you have an opportunity that in the process, there could be some remedy, or there could be a way that something can be received from the consumer.
Where is the money going to come from to write off all this debt? Who's paying for it ultimately?
Kathy, I wouldn't put it as a write-off per se. Like I've indicated, as we speak right now, with the other measures of debt review, there is some level of extinguishment to some extent, to some of them. And also, the banks and other financial institutions, depending on circumstances, they do make arrangements, and there are some debt write-offs or extinguishment. Sure. So it is there. It's not a new thing.
Once somebody gets to the end of the line with this process, you've exhausted the 24 months or whatever other time period may exist, who then pays for that? Because ultimately, this is money that has been given out, that has been spent. And I'm asking, ultimately, Are we looking at a situation where government is going to step in and say, well, actually, we are going to take on the burden of these outstanding monies? Or will you be expecting that the financial institutions who've given out these loans are the ones that will take the ultimate cost?
I would look at it this way. The best way to look at it is that we have a measure in place that comes in to bring remedy for the consumers. And not only that, there is an opportunity in the process that those who are giving this credit can also benefit or get some return or something back. Yes, at the end, there is a possibility that there might be a loss. But we are of the view as government and even the portfolio committee that much focus has been put on that last loss. So in the process of the review and the different parameters that have been put in place, somebody can get a job. And when they get a job, they can be able to pay, or when their circumstances change, depending on what the circumstances are, then there is a possibility of a remedy for the credit providers.
Sure, absolutely. But when one looks at the current economic crisis, right, and where South Africa is right now, if anything, from the short to medium term, if somebody were to benefit from this in the next year or so, chances are their situation might not change in the next 2 to 3 years, realistically speaking. So are you saying that the banks then are going to have to make do with having to cover for these losses, essentially?
The best way, I would say, we look at it this way. As I've indicated, it's a measure. And the fact that it brings us something that is not there. So let's say somebody, let's remove this measure and I can't pay anyway. So what happens is that the banks, the financial services provider, credit providers, they have to make a way around it. So with this, different processes that are put in place and hoping that in the process, circumstances can change.
Because ultimately, if I'm hearing you correctly, you might not want to say it as explicitly. The banks are the ones that are going to have to cover the costs. And there's been concerns raised by industries, including the Banking Association of South Africa, who are saying one of the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation is that it then increases the interest rates at which loans are given to low-income earners. What do you make of that?
Last year in 2018, the portfolio committee visited the UK, and they also studied a similar model to the one that is in South Africa that we've introduced around the debt review. And the issue there is that we are of the view that the unintended consequences that they foresee may not materialize to the extent that they are making it out to be. Because when the UK situation was studied, there were no moral hazards that were picked up from that best practice.
Sure.
So we are of the view that, Kathy, as much as there are concerns around this and the implications that could happen for the banks and the other credit providers, we think that impact is something that we'll have to review over time as we implement. And the bill, fortunately, allows for that.
What about the illegal lending sector? When you do those feasibility studies, was there at all comparison between South Africa and the UK at the rate of which there's an illegal lending sector? Because one of the things that's also been raised is that this might drive people then into getting abomashonisa or whoever else. And that has had its own disastrous impact on our communities.
Consideration was taken around the issues of the informal lenders. And in fact, now the bill also introduces a provision that says that if one provides credit without being registered, there will be consequences. So it's more of an enforcement issue. We are aware of those concerns. They were deliberated upon. And we are of the view that with different reviews of these processes, we will be able to see going forward the actual impact. But at this stage, I think these are concerns and they are valid. However, we still need to look into the situation.
And the financial risk to the state, especially when you're putting banks, by the looks of it, in such a shaky position.
I would look at it broadly than that, Kathy. We have a serious problem in South Africa of over-indebtedness and also reckless lending. So There is a responsibility that must also take place that comes from credit providers, because there is an extent of reckless lending in the country, and over indebtedness, it is a problem. And I understand what you're saying regarding the costs, but we think that this measure is much needed, it's going to bring massive relief, and obviously we need to monitor it, we need to check the impact and see how it's unfolding going forward.
Are you worried that there might be any kind of legal opposition to this bill, at least in its current form, because there are those who have questioned its constitutionality, and in fact, if it's in good legal standing?
We are of the view that it is. And in fact, the deprivation of the people who are currently not serviced at the moment also may raise an issue of constitutionality, because there is discrimination for this low target band of consumers. They're not catered for. So in a way, if we talk about we are depriving the credit providers when we introduce this, there will be some losses to them. Also currently with what we have, which is not sustainable, we also have deprivation, and we have also discrimination. And I think constitutionally, we need to have an inclusive situation in the country.
So very briefly, what are you going to be doing to win over the banking sector? Because as it stands, you don't have their support on this matter.
Agreed. We plan to collaborate with them. We do have standing engagements with them. And going forward, now that this is a law, we need to work together to even look at practical approaches in terms of how are we going to implement this legislation.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. The Deputy Director General of the Department of Trade and Industry, DR.EVELYN MASOTJA, she, of course, speaking on that amendment to the National Credit Bill. And, of course, we'll wait and see when exactly the final regulations of how exactly it's going to be exercised and given effect. We'll have to wait and hear when those announcements will be. We'll take a short break.